Hey everyone, welcome back to the Recovery Channel. This week we wrap up Step 10 by not talking about Step 10 at all. You've been working hard and could probably use a break. So this week there's no homework, no mindfulness practice, and nothing deep. Just kick back, grab yourself a non-alcoholic beverage, and listen. This information could come in handy for you someday, especially if you get involved with helping others. But for today, just take it easy and enjoy the information. We're going to talk about some of the key differences in approach in the various programs, specifically AA, NA, OA, and SAA. We'll start with what the programs have in common. They're all 12-step programs, and the steps themselves are very similar. They all involve admitting that the addiction tends to kick our butt, and we can't overcome it on our own. We need a higher power, as well as community, to help us. We take an inventory of our lives, we work on our flaws, we make amends to those we've hurt, and try to let go of our resentments. Then, we try to help others to achieve the sobriety and serenity that we've come to enjoy. We do our best to live one day at a time and accept life on life's terms. All right, so what are the differences? Let's start with AA, the original from which all others came, the Mac Daddy of 12-step programs. It started out in 1935 and is now in about 180 countries. Estimates are that there are currently about 2 million members. It's impossible to know how many people have been through it total, given that it's an anonymous group, but it's a big number. AA is focused on alcoholism and doesn't really open itself up to other addictions. That's not to say that you'll get kicked out of an AA meeting for being addicted to the wrong thing, but from a program perspective, it's all about alcohol. One complaint a lot of people have with AA is that it's too religious. They walk into a meeting and hear the 12 steps, and God is mentioned by name 4 times and alluded to a couple more. Ironically, Bill W., who wrote the 12 steps, was an agnostic and atheist at points in his life. Those who stick around long enough figure out that it's not really about God per se, but the idea of a higher power is central to the process. Another distinctive characteristic of AA is that it's about complete abstinence. There is no room for harm reduction or a softer path. NA, which came about in the 50s, is similar to AA in that it stresses complete abstinence, but it expands that to include all mind-altering substances, including alcohol. Where AA is only about alcohol, NA is much more inclusive. At meetings, people simply say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm an addict." NA is also a little less spiritual. A higher power is still central to the steps, but the literature and program are somewhat more focused on personal accountability and empowerment. One other difference is that there's still a social stigma around drug addiction as compared to alcoholism, so it might be a little harder to find a meeting if you're in a rural area. All right, let's change gears a bit and talk about OA. Food is not a substance that one can abstain from, obviously. So that's the biggest difference. You can live without drugs and alcohol, but you can't live without food. So one would think that OA is all about controlling the amount of food one eats. That's partly true, but interestingly, OA is not actually just about overeating. It also addresses other unhealthy issues around food, like anorexia and bulimia. Yes, as part of the program, members develop a personal food plan, but the focus is really on behaviors and patterns of thinking related to food. In OA, members need to create new habits around eating. That means creating meal plans, maintaining food diaries, and getting regular exercise. Now, in my experience, strictly going to meetings and working the steps is not enough to get sober and find serenity, though some are able to do it. I think you have to get at what caused the addiction in the first place, and that typically requires some type of therapy. OA gets that, and they put a strong emphasis on dealing with the emotional aspects of food issues, including body image, shame, and trauma. Now, one downside of OA is that people looking for something that's kind of prescriptive and has strict guidelines, you're not going to find it at OA. Like most 12-step programs, it's up to the individual to set their specific course. Another program that leaves the specifics up to the individual is SAA. This is also an addiction where the substance or behavior is not something that people want to abstain from entirely. It's not like food where you need it to survive, but not many people want to cut sex out of their lives entirely. The added complexity of sex addiction is that it's totally natural for us to crave sex. That's just how we were built, especially men. That's not a sexist statement, it's just a biological fact. Higher levels of testosterone cause increased sex drive. So if it's natural to crave sex, how does one know they're an addict? I've heard many men say, Yeah, I look at porn. So does every other guy I know. That's not addiction, it's just normal. I encourage you to re-watch week 2, where we define addiction and provide some questions to ask yourself. But basically, the best test for addiction is to see if you can stop for at least 90 days. When you do stop, do you have intense cravings and you can't think of anything else? Another test is if you continue to partake in the behavior even though it's causing you harm, physically, financially, relationally, or otherwise. Has your significant other asked you to stop and you find yourself making excuses as to why you won't stop? Once someone determines that they might have a sex addiction and head into an SAA meeting, they're likely to hear about the 3 circles. What's unique about SAA is there is no universal definition of sobriety. It's not like alcohol where either you had a drink or you didn't. Every member needs to come up with their own definition of sobriety and what constitutes a slip. That's where the 3 circles come in. The innermost circle is where you put your bottom line behaviors, or those behaviors that would be considered a slip. For a lot of people, sobriety means not seeking sexual gratification outside of their committed relationship. That might mean adding internet surfing with the intent of finding stimulating images to their inner circle. This can be tricky because you don't want to make that inner circle overly restrictive or you'll be having slips every day. For example, I've heard guys say that their inner circle includes not having lustful thoughts about women that are not their wife. Well, good luck with that. We can't control our initial thoughts about things we see. We can only decide what to do with the thought after it pops up. A more realistic inner circle item would be to say, I won't entertain the lustful thoughts that come into my head for more than 3 seconds. There's also a 3-second rule for checking someone out. You also don't want to make your inner circle too vague or loose. For example, if your inner circle is that you won't have sex with anyone besides your spouse, then what about porn? What about massage parlors? What about emotional affairs? Now you might be thinking this process is overly legalistic. I know when I'm doing something wrong and I don't need to write it down or put it in a circle. Well, if you struggle with addiction, you know that it's cunning and powerful. It's amazing how good we get at justification, minimization, and talking ourselves into a slip. So having that concrete definition of what a slip is when you're a sex addict is important. The middle circle contains behaviors and places that are not considered a slip, but if we're in the middle circle, we need to be on alert. Some middle circle items we can avoid. The street where that strip club is at. Talking to that person at the office I'm attracted to. Drinking alcohol. But some middle circle items we can't avoid. Going to the grocery store might be triggering for some addicts. Seeing ads with scantily clad women. Hearing a certain song, smelling a certain perfume. When we can't avoid the middle circle item, we just have to make sure we take care of ourselves in healthy ways when those things trigger us. Finally, the outer circle contains healthy activities that help us stay sober, or are just healthy in general. It's helpful to list those things out because we can turn to those things when we're triggered. We also want to be sure to make those things part of our routine like we talked about in week 30. This isn't just a good idea for SAA, it's helpful for anyone in recovery. We need to replace our old bad habits with good ones, and figuring out healthy things we enjoy is key in doing that. Okay, like I promised, nothing too deep and no homework this week. What I want you to take away from this is that addiction is addiction. Whether it's booze, gambling, food, social media, or sex, all addicts share the fact that they can't control their use, and at some point it starts causing them problems. The 12 steps of recovery work for a lot of people, and they can be applied to just about any addiction. They're even applied to things like codependency. But every addiction and every person has unique needs, and there's no such thing as a universal solution. That's why we try to give you so many different tools to choose from here at the Recovery Channel. Figure out what works for you and run with it. Keep an open mind and be willing to try new things. Whatever it takes, as long as the solution isn't worse than the problem. All right, that's it for this week. Stay strong, stay open, and stay sober. We'll see you next week.